In the previous lecture, we already implemented our first continuous integration system for our Android application. And we actually already saw it build. So what we did was come here over to GitHub and merge one of the feature branches that we had created from Visual Studio into the dev branch. So our dev branch, of course, as soon as it received all of that code from the feature one branch, and because of the settings that we had established over here in App Center for the Android application, triggered a build. And in fact, right now, I already see that my dev branch has built, and it has a success icon over here to the left. It says that there is already a last build a few hours ago. And if I select this one, I can see all of those builds. So far, of course, only one. But if I select this build, I see that it was an automatic build, how long it took for the application to build, and some stack trace about the build. So excellent, it's already working. Now what I want to do is set up the exact same thing for iOS, because so far we haven't done that. So I'm going to navigate over to the iOS application, and it's going to be pretty much exactly the same. But because this is iOS, there are eventually going to be some differences that I want to point out in this lecture. So of course, here in the iOS application, I navigate over to the Build tab, and I can also connect my GitHub application. In this case, I am going to search for exactly the same application. After all, remember that the same repository contains both the iOS and the Android applications. And as soon as I select it, of course, App Center is going to identify the iOS version of this application in that repository. It is ready to identify Xamarin projects and display all of those branches. Again, I am going to configure the build by going over here to the configuration button. And this first one, that is the dev branch, is still going to have a configuration of debug. I am still going to be selecting the latest stable version of iOS and the latest available version of Xcode. Notice that there are a couple here available. I usually just select the newest version. Again, I am not yet going to be setting any build scripts in here. I am still going to set the build type to simulator. Remember that if I wanted to test this on a device, I would have to sign the build. We're not yet going to be taking a look at that, so I will just build this on a simulator that doesn't require a signed build. And of course, the important option that I mentioned in the previous lecture, this setting right here to build this branch on every push. This one, again, is the one that enables continuous integration, that as soon as I push something over to this branch, in this case the dev branch, a build is going to be triggered. So I'm going to leave this feature selected. I am also going to automatically increment the build number through build ID. And it says that since so far there are 0 builds, the next one is going to be build 1. Not yet any environment variables, not yet going to be signing the builds. And because I am not signing it, it means that we cannot test on our real device and we cannot distribute. Don't worry about these options right here just yet, we're going to see them eventually. It essentially means that the build that a branch creates is going to get signed so it can be tested and deployed to actual devices. And I will also enable this build status badge because I also want this markdown code so I can paste it on my README file, just like we did with the Android version. And I am going to save this configuration. Again, so far the application, the iOS version at least, hasn't built just yet. Because it wasn't configured when there was a push over to the dev branch, it of course didn't build, and it's not going to build previous commits to a specific branch. So we have to execute another pull request. And that is exactly what I will do as well. I'm going to navigate back to GitHub, and I am going to, actually the first thing that I will do is navigate over to the pull request that I merged that is now closed. So I have to click on this closed tab and navigate over to the feature 1 pull request, in here, I'm actually going to show you this button that we will usually click whenever we merge a feature branch. After it is merged, well, supposedly the feature is ready, so we don't need this branch anymore. So we'll simply delete feature 1. And you would eventually also delete it from Visual Studio. We will do that a bit later. For now, I want to navigate back to code, to the dev branch where there is already a README file. I am going to select the README file and I am going to edit it. Just to make things a bit clearer, I am going to set this as the Android build. And down below, I am going to set an iOS build where I am going to paste that code that I just copied from App Center, the markdown for the status badge. And you know what, just so this looks a little bit better, I'm going to change how I am building this. I am displaying this. I'm going to be displaying it not as a couple of titles and their content, but as a table. So just a few modifications in here so we can have a small table displaying this information. Of course, Android and iOS are going to be the titles of the table. And so I will have something like this. Essentially, I am creating the title, the division for the content of the table started with this bar, then divide the two columns with this bar over here and close the bar over here. If I preview the changes, it looks a little bit better. And this right here, it just means that this is going to be deleted. This was how it previously looked, only with the Android build, and now it will have both builds. So yeah, this is going to be my new README file. I will commit this as update README with iOS build. And what I want to do is create a new branch for this commit and start a pull request. So we previously noticed this option, but we haven't used it yet. This is going to be a shortcut for these kind of small changes that we may make to some files, like the one that we're doing right now. Let's say that this is going to be branch feature 2. What this is going to do is create this feature 2 branch and immediately start a new pull request to merge into dev, the original branch from where we started. So I will propose a file change, but so far what it did is create that branch. It's not yet on the base branch. That will have to happen through the pull request. So I will create the pull request. So far, nothing is happening. And we're going to see a bit more about this in the next lecture. It's going to be a bit of a controversial one, but so far nothing is happening, of course, because as we saw in the previous lecture, we need to first merge into the dev branch so it actually triggers this build. And yes, you may have realized it is also going to trigger a build over on the Android application. So we will have two builds on the Android application, one build on the iOS application. So let's merge this pull request. I am going to confirm the merge, and here, at this point where the pull request is successfully merged, and by the way, I can delete the feature 2 branch now, but at this point, if I navigate over to App Center, the build has been triggered. You can see how in the dev branch, I see that there is a build that is currently queued. And here, after just a few seconds, it has started building. If everything succeeds, there is going to be a new available build of our iOS application using, of course, the iOS version of the code that we have in this repository. At the same time, if we navigate over to the Android application, to the build tab, we see that indeed it triggered another build for this application. And again, it is building so far, but if everything succeeds, it will display this status, a build success status. So there you have it. We have successfully implemented continuous integration for both of our applications, the Android and the iOS. Everything, of course, coming from the same repository because this is Xamarin. So both are pointing to the same repository. It is App Center's job to identify which of the projects is the Android one, which one is the iOS one. So in the next lecture, we're going to take a look at something a bit controversial, as I said. So far, pull requests are not doing what I promised. We are not, from the pull requests, able to build or to check. And by the way, notice that this has successfully built already. But from the pull requests, we see nothing, no connection to App Center. Sure, eventually when we merge, we see something happening on App Center, but it happens until we merge. In the next lecture, we're going to see how we can make App Center help GitHub, as soon as the pull request is created, check if the merge can happen.